And welcome back once again to Forbes Sports Money, where we are joined in studio by Richard Brand of Aaron Fox LLP, here to help us analyze the Dodgers' newest mega deal. Not completely done. The numbers are astounding. At least $7 billion over 25 years. Why is this deal right now, Richard, getting so much attention?
Well, Bob, there's a number of different reasons. First, you have to start with the size. When you're talking about $7 billion, $8 billion, I think that's real money, and I think people understand that, so everybody's interested in it. I think the second thing is the team itself. All the things that people went through to get to this. There was the bankruptcy proceedings, there's all that stuff. So the Dodgers already got great attention in a huge market. And I think a lot of people would say that this is the deal that helped drive the sale. The speculation of $2.15 billion, well, that came from somewhere. And a lot of people say, well, you know, a number like $7 or $8 billion certainly helps pay the bills. So I think that, coupled with the structure, it's a very different structure than we're used to seeing, and I think that created a tremendous amount of attention.
Now you look at the structure, $3.5 billion in straight rights fees from Time Warner to the Dodgers, and then another $3.5 billion coming from three sources. They're coming from guaranteed carriage fees of about $4 per subscriber per month. You're also talking about a branding rights fee included in that $3.5 billion, and then you're also talking about a guarantee from Time Warner Cable for shoulder programming coverage. That, as far as I know, has never been done in Major League Baseball, and the Dodgers want this deal because they don't want that $3.5 billion to count towards the 34% of baseball's revenue sharing. How likely, in your opinion, is it that they can pass muster with that, for the Dodgers, I mean?
It's going to be a difficult slog. It's going to be an awful lot of discussions. I think you have to start with how these deals usually are put together. There's a typical model out there, actually three models, and teams go on different levels. One is a simple rights fee model. That's easy, right? You sign the deal, the team gets a huge amount of money each year. No risk, no mess, no fuss, perfect. On the other side of the spectrum, you have the equity deal where the team says, I'm going to do my own regional sports network, and I'm going to take all the risk of that network, and I'm going to get all the reward, and that works just fine too, except when it doesn't work just fine, because regional sports networks are kind of risky. A lot of teams took a middle position where they would do the rights fee deal, but they would want a little bit of a sweetener. What would that sweetener be? Equity ownership. That's nice. You get some upside. You don't have any risks. So what do we have here? Haven't seen the documents, just read the articles, read your articles, read everyone else's articles. And I think what you're seeing is you have a strange animal where you have the model of building your own regional sports network, but not having any of the risk to have that. Put that risk on the Time Warner Cable network, and so now what you have, the best of both worlds. The risk-reward, well, you got all the reward, and the risk goes on the other team. So I think that creates an extremely different situation. Now, what can baseball do about that? They've got to look at it. They've got to think about this because of two words, revenue sharing. Okay, 34% of those revenues are going to have to go to Major League Baseball. But I said something very important, those revenues. What are those revenues? Is it the rights fees you talked about? Is it the branding rights? Is it something in between? And that's where the big discussion is going to be.
And you're talking about a huge difference in money. Average maybe $85 million compared to $280 million. They're trying to figure out how to divide that up. It's a kind of a have your cake and eat it too deal right now for the Dodgers.
Absolutely. And you know, how do they get to the $280 million? They take $7 billion, they divide by 25 years, and they come up with an average. As we know, it's a rights fee with a 4% escalator and all these other things. So yeah, it's going to be one of those things where they're going to have to kind of figure out what's fair, what works. And I was telling Mike earlier, in my view, it's never quite the way you read it in the newspapers. Hey, it's not even quite the way you read it in the documents you draft. There's always some different stories to that. So is, in fact, this a deal where the Dodgers have no risk? If the Dodgers have absolutely no risk and the Time Warner Cable is taking all that risk, it might be very hard. It might be very hard to sustain a model where you only pay 34% of that $84 million rights fee, because it creates a precedent, both a precedent for future teams, but I think it can also create a precedent for the prior teams. Those teams that had a regional sports network and, quote unquote, did take on some of that did take on some of the risk are going to have a different feeling than those who didn't. So I think what we're going to see is there's going to be an interesting discussion. My feeling is these things always end up somewhere in terms of a negotiated settlement. I don't ever think it's all one way or all the other way, but we're going to have to see.
Yeah, no one doubts that the $3.5 billion rights fee is subject to revenue sharing. That's right. Everybody agrees.
That's the price of admission.
But how do you sell it that guarantees from Time Warner Cable that the baseball team is taking on risk? They're guarantees. There is no risk. That is almost like, look, all naming rights deals, they want a branding rights fee. Naming rights deals in baseball, stadium naming rights, they're subject to revenue sharing. How are the Dodgers going to get around that? I mean, they're going to have, every team knocking on Major League Baseball's door saying, look at the deals recently, the Astros, the Angels, the San Diego Padres, the Texas Rangers, they're all going to be saying, hey, why were we treated this way, where we had to share these revenues or take on ownership, equity of the RSN, and the Dodgers don't have to do that. How could they possibly get around that?
Well, it's an excellent point, and in that very same example, you have sort of the haves and the have-nots. The haves are the teams that did these big deals and are paying a large revenue share. The have-nots are those teams that were hoping to get an even larger revenue share as a result of a deal like this. So there is going to be some concern, but I will say this, in my experience, it's never quite exactly the way you think it is, and I do believe that if there's a way to show that there was some risk or the deal is different, then you might have something different coming up in the end. In the end, it's going to be, in my opinion, a lot of smart people talking about it. And one thing I will say, the people who worked on this deal, they have the best lawyers, the best business people. They didn't miss this concept. Nobody woke up at the end and said, oh, yeah, we signed the deal and I forgot there was a revenue share. Man, I'm so sorry. It's not going to work like that. Everybody knew there's something there. So I think there's probably a lot more involved than we know, and we probably will find out as the months go on.
Well, I'll tell you guys one thing for sure. How this is ruled at the end is going to have a huge impact on the Dodgers ownership and also on Dodger fans in terms of how big a payroll this team can afford. Because that other $3.5 billion that the Dodgers are trying to shield from revenue sharing, that you're talking at 34%, that's over $1 billion. And this is a team, this $2 billion acquisition was bought largely with other people's money that Guggenheim Baseball Partners is going to have to start paying back soon. So, this is a very key ruling in terms of the ownership of this team and how it's going to be run for years, I think.
Rich, final question. Could the Dodgers make the argument in terms of assuming risk and tell Major League Baseball, look, we're not worried about the 7-8 months of baseball that we have, the live programming, the games. What about the 4 or 5 other months we have to program? We have to assume liability for that. People aren't going to want to watch a channel if it's just maybe 7-8 months a year. They're going to want to have people tuning in year-round to justify those carriage fees.
Well, that's a great point. That is a great risk. Usually, what's the ideal regional sports network? It's one that has winter sports and summer sports. It's one that has a basketball team and has a baseball team, and that way you have vibrant programming all year round. So it is a great risk, but from what we're reading, the way this is structured, it's not the Dodgers' risk. So that almost cuts against them. You can say, hey, there is a pretty big risk that we only have one sports team, but guess what? Time Warner Cable's taking that risk. So that could be used against them in the same way that could be used for them, unless, of course, the documentation, when it comes out and when people look at it, actually shows that there is some risk. That's what it's going to come down to. And again, we have all the bits and pieces. Obviously, when you put the whole picture together, you're going to have a much better sense.
Yeah, we're still missing a few puzzle pieces, so we're going to
and we
wait
may
and
never
find
see
out.
those pieces
Right.
until we read it in Mike's column.
Exactly. Rich, thanks. Appreciate you being here.